There is a photograph that keeps surfacing out of Russia this week. Not a battlefield, not a burning tower, a gas station, an ordinary forecourt on an ordinary road, and a line of cars stretching back past the frame, engines off, drivers standing beside their doors in the heat, waiting. Some of them have been there for hours, not minutes. Hours. In one Siberian town, motorists say they waited most of a working day for half a tank. There is nothing dramatic about it. That is exactly what makes it strange. This is the country that sells energy to the world. The country whose entire story about itself is built on oil and gas flowing out in endless rivers of money. And here are its own citizens, standing in a queue, holding a jerry can, watching a handwritten sign that says how many liters they're allowed to buy today. So here is the question I want you to sit with before we go any further. What does it mean when the largest energy exporter on Earth starts rationing fuel to its own people? Let me tell you what that queue actually is. It is not a supply hiccup. It is not a bad week at one refinery. According to a tally by the Moscow Times published on the 25th of June, fuel rationing was in place across at least 56 Russian regions. 56. I want to be careful with that number, and I'll come back to why. But hold the scale of it for a moment. This is not a border region under fire. This is a condition spread across most of the country, and the rationing is real in its details. In the Kursk region, authorities capped gasoline at 20 liters per car. 20 liters. That's about 5 gallons. Enough to matter in a place where people also need fuel for generators during air raids and to evacuate when the sirens go. When you ration the fuel that runs the generator and the fuel that gets you out of danger, you are rationing something closer to safety itself. Today is the 2nd of July, 2026, and in the last several days, the tempo of this story has tightened sharply. On the 30th of June, some independent stations reportedly sold fuel above 100 rubles a liter for the first time. 2 days before that, on the 28th and 29th, Vladimir Putin himself acknowledged the crisis in public. That admission is the hinge this whole episode turns on, and we'll get there. This is Professor Zhang. If you care about the machinery underneath the headlines, the fuel, the money, the logistics, the war beneath the war, then subscribe and stay with me. I don't do panic and I don't do cheerleading. I do the numbers, honestly, including the ones that complicate my own argument. So let's follow the money. And to do that, we have to start with a strange piece of engineering. When you picture Ukraine striking a Russian refinery, you probably imagine a fireball, a storage tank, black smoke, but the analysts watching this closely say the target has changed. Indra Overland at the Norwegian Institute of International Affairs put it plainly. At the refineries, Ukraine is especially targeting the fluid catalytic cracking units. He calls them the hearts of the refinery. They are, in his words, difficult, expensive, and time-consuming to replace. Here's why that word hearts matters. A refinery does not just filter crude oil into gasoline, it cracks it. It takes heavy, useless distillate and breaks it down chemically into the light products a car engine can actually burn. The units that do that, the fluid catalytic crackers, the hydrocrackers, are the most sophisticated, most specialized parts of the whole plant. And many of their components are Western-made and now sanctioned. Lead times to replace them run into weeks or months. Do you see the logic? If you hit a storage tank, Russia builds another tank. If you hit a distillation column, it's repairable. But if you hit the heart, the cracker, you have damaged the one thing that cannot be quickly bought, shipped, or rebuilt. Sergei Vakulenko at Carnegie described the whole crisis as a race between Ukrainian drones and Russian repair teams. And Ukraine in 2026 has learned to hit the same refinery again and again, so the repair teams never finish. Watch that pattern play out. On the 12th of June, Ukraine struck Tatnef's flagship Tenneco refinery in Tatarstan, and Tatnef stations across the country went to sales limits, and people started panic buying. On the 25th, the NORSI refinery, SRAIS, reported as Russia's 4th largest and its 2nd largest producer of gasoline sitting near Kstovo, roughly 450 kilometers east of Moscow, suspended operations after a drone strike. The same day, Ukraine hit 2 refineries in Ufa, more than 1,300 kilometers from the front line. Think about that distance. That is deeper into Russia than most people imagine Ukraine can even reach. And then it kept going. Slavyansk, Yaroslavl. A strike on a plant in Volgograd using a weapon called the FP-5 Flamingo, a Ukrainian-built missile with a reported range of 3,000 kilometers and a warhead of over 1,000 kilograms. By some counts, 3 refineries went offline in 2 days, taking with them something like 12% of Russia's refining capacity. Now, here's where I have to be honest with you, because this is exactly the kind of number people abuse. That 12% figure and the roughly a quarter figure The Guardian reported, and other numbers floating around, they don't agree with each other. Estimates of how much of Russia's refining is offline range widely depending on the moment, the source, and the definition. Anyone who gives you one clean, confident percentage and tells you that's the number is frankly selling you something. What we can say honestly is narrower and more durable. Refining capacity is being knocked out faster than it's coming back. Diesel production fell around 10% in May after a similar drop in April, and the amount of offline hydrocracker capacity has climbed dramatically compared to a year ago. The direction is clear. The precise magnitude is contested. Both of those things are true at once, and I'd rather give you the honest range than a fake certainty. Now, follow what happens next, because this is the part that reveals the real mechanism. Russia is not running out of oil. That's the paradox at the center of this. In June, Russia's seaborne crude exports actually rose to over 4 million barrels a day, the highest level since February 2022, so the crude is flowing. What's broken is the ability to turn that crude into gasoline and diesel. The refining is the bottleneck, not the oil. And that produces something almost surreal. Russia, one of the great oil powers of the world, has started importing refined fuel, gasoline from India, product from Belarus. Reports describe tens of thousands of tons already dispatched and plans for hundreds of thousands of tons a month. The country that sells energy to the planet is now buying back the finished version of its own raw material because it cannot process enough of its own. And there's a sting in the tail for the war chest. When you have more crude than you can refine, you dump the excess onto the export market. More supply, lower price. And so even as export volumes hit that post-2022 high, weekly crude revenue reportedly fell to around $1.9 billion, the lowest in months. Sell more, earn less. The very thing that funds the war is being squeezed, not by sanctions alone, but by the physics of a refinery that can't keep up. I want to pause here and give you the other side, honestly, because I promised you I would. This is not a collapse. It's important to say that clearly. Carnegie's Vakalenko notes that this current shortage is actually smaller than the one Russia went through in the fall of 2025. Russian ports repair quickly. One major export port saw loadings rebound nearly 50% month on month after earlier strikes. And crucially, the Russian military gets fuel priority. Marko Kivinen at the Alexandria Institute put it carefully. This affects the legitimacy of the government, but it does not immediately weaken the war effort. Tatiana Mitrova at Columbia makes a similar point. Russia has had fuel shortages before, even in peacetime. What the strikes are doing, she says, is exhausting the system's adaptability, exhausting it, not yet breaking it. Hold on to that distinction because it's the honest one. Corroding is not the same as collapsing. A system can bleed for a very long time before it fails, and it may not fail at all. So what changed this week? Why does it matter that on the 28th of June, Putin said anything at all? Because for a long time, the official Russian line was denial or near silence or the language of unscheduled maintenance. Then in early June, the Energy Ministry admitted an increase in enemy air attacks leading to temporary complications in supplies. And then the president himself said it out loud. His words were measured. He said, and I'm quoting, "You are well aware that problems for drivers and for businesses persist. Unfortunately, there are still queues at petrol stations too." And then, carefully, right now we're observing a certain shortage, but it's not critical. Notice what he did there. He admitted the queues because the queues are unhideable, because they're in 56 regions and photographed on every phone. And in the same breath, he defined them as not critical. That is not an admission of defeat. Let me be very direct with you because you'll see thumbnails, maybe even mine, that use that phrase. Putin admits defeat is a headline. It is not a fact. What he admitted is that the crisis is real and public. What he denied is that it's decisive. And every serious analyst in this story, Zavadskaya, Kivinen, Mitrova, agrees this is attritional and corrosive, not regime ending. If I told you otherwise, I'd be doing the exact thing I built this channel to avoid. But the admission still matters, and here's why. Margarita Zavadskaya at the Finnish Institute of International Affairs framed it with a phrase worth carrying home. When refineries burn, she said, and fuel becomes scarce and authorities improvise, the population sees that the state cannot fully provide what it claims to monopolize: security, stability, and provision. That's the quiet bargain underneath authoritarian rule. You give up a great deal, and in return, the state guarantees the basics. A gas line, 13 hours long, is a visible crack in that promise. Not a revolution, a crack. Zavadskaya herself is clear that this is unlikely to produce regime collapse or mass revolutionary dynamics. It's cumulative and politically corrosive, in her words, rather than immediately destabilizing. Now let me bring this to something you can touch, because so far this has all been happening thousands of kilometers away. There's a second domino, and it may reach your kitchen table. Russia is the world's largest wheat exporter. The July and August harvest depends on diesel, for the tractors, the pumps, the trucks that move grain. Overland warns the shortage is expected to disrupt that harvest. I want to be precise, expected. This is a forecast, not a measured outcome. As of today, no one can point to a ruined harvest, but if diesel scarcity does bite during those critical weeks, a domestic Russian fuel problem could become a global food price problem. And that's the moment it stops being a story about someone else's gas station and becomes a story about the price of bread, far from any front line. The war underneath the war has a way of surfacing in the most ordinary places, a loaf, a queue, a number on a sign, and it's surfacing on the front line too. Reports, and I'll flag that this particular one comes from a single Ukrainian military source, so hold it lightly, describe Russian units near Kharkiv and Sumy rationing generator fuel and moving logistics on foot. Alongside that, Ukraine's general staff, as aggregated by the Institute for the Study of War, reports Russian fuel vehicle and tank losses jumping to nearly 13,000 in June, against roughly 3,400 a year earlier, close to a fourfold increase. That figure comes from a party to the war, and it hasn't been independently verified, so I give it to you with that label attached. But if it's even directionally right, it tells you the fuel story and the battlefield story are no longer separate stories. So let me tell you what this evidence does show and what it does not. It shows a real, widespread, publicly admitted fuel crisis across most of Russia, rationing, hours-long queues, prices past a threshold they'd never crossed, and a president forced to speak. It shows a smart, deliberate Ukrainian strategy aimed at the parts of the refining system that are hardest to repair, reaching deeper into Russia than before. It shows a genuine squeeze on the money, more oil sold for less revenue. And it shows the strain leaking into the harvest forecast and the front. What it does not show is a Russia on the edge of breaking. It does not show a war effort about to stall. It does not show the end of anything. The analysts are unanimous on that, and I'm not going to pretend to know better than they do. This crisis is, by one careful account, smaller than the last one. Ports heal. The military eats first. The system is being exhausted, not shattered. Both of those pictures are true at the same time. A country can be genuinely hurting and nowhere near collapse. That tension, that refusal to resolve into a clean headline, is the actual shape of this war. Most things that matter don't resolve cleanly. So here's the question I'll leave you with tonight. We tend to imagine that empires end in a single dramatic moment, a fall, a surrender, a crash. But what if the truer story is quieter than that? What if power doesn't break so much as it erodes, one broken promise at a time, until one day a citizen stands in a 13-hour line, holding an empty can, and simply stops believing the thing they were told to believe? We can't see that moment coming. We might not recognize it even after it's passed, which is why the honest answer tonight is that we are watching something real, and we do not yet know what it is. This is Professor Zhang. I'll see you in the next one. That's the full script at roughly 3,200 words, all 10 beats in order, every claim traceable to your pack, with admits defeat handled as your uncertainty section instructed. 2 small notes. I flagged the contested capacity percentages rather than picking one, and I attributed the belligerent sourced figures, the lost numbers, the frontline rationing, as your pack required.